And your next speaker got the little assignment of talking about how to save the planet. But they chose wisely because he's someone who, in co-founding Global Citizen, is now being called on from the leaders of the G20 to the Clinton Global Initiative to that little get-together in Davos every year, the World Economic Forum. So please welcome Simon Moss, the co-founder of Global Citizen, who can teach us all about ways we can save the world.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Simon Moss. Yes, I'm Australian. And what I wanted to share with you today was some lessons that I've learned from a decade of campaigning and activism in founding and then running an organisation called Global Citizen. And our vision at Global Citizen is a world without extreme poverty. So we work on big, complex global challenges. I'm going to take you around the world and share some examples of how we've mixed pop and policy, how we've used the tools of popular culture and worked with everyday people to create what we hope is some pretty significant change. Along the way, I'm going to talk a lot about what we've learnt, the good things, the bad things, and I'm more than happy to answer plenty of questions about the challenges at the end. But to start with, I want to take you back a decade to my hometown of Melbourne, Australia, where as a young college student, I and some other volunteers were working to try and get the Australian government to increase its contributions of foreign aid. As you remember, or those of you who are old enough, the mid-2000s were a heady time. There was plenty of money going around. It was pre-crash, and we were making the call through petitions, through stunts, through events, through concerts, to call on the Australian government to become one of the more generous countries in the world. We mobilised people from around the country, and one trip I organised took 1,000 young people across about 15 swing districts in Australia 12 months before an election to gather up 40,000 voices and signatures from young people. And doing all of those things, we really learnt that you could get politicians to show up. They loved people applauding them. They loved people saying you're doing a good job. And in fact, we were able to get a guy named Kevin Rudd. He was then opposition leader. He went on to become Australian Prime Minister to commit to double Australian foreign aid later that year on the day that we ran an event at the Sydney Opera House and projected the words "Make Poverty History" on the side of the arena. Now for us, that was exciting. It was the first big win. It helped get $5 billion more foreign aid into the system. But it also taught us something important, that every good campaign that mixes pop, that mixes policy, that has a real point, can't just end that day. Because today, a decade later, Australia now gives less foreign aid than it did 10 years ago. Because we didn't keep up the pressure. Because we, as we look at this world that we live in right now with lots of challenges, can do an awful lot that can make a difference. But we've got to be smart about thinking what's going to work, what's really going to make the biggest difference, and how are we going to do it. We work with what the United Nations set out a couple of years ago called the 17 Global Goals for Sustainable Development. These give us a pretty good path for where the world could be in 2030 if we got it together. And our campaigning at Global Citizen is all about asking the question, what is it that we can do that can help achieve these goals? Along the way, we've built our model in such a way that asks, how can we maximise the amount of pressure we're putting on people? And at Global Citizen, our model is about going to the smartest people we can find, the policy experts, asking them, what are the one or two things you wish you could change? And then mobilising public support, political support, media support, and sometimes working with celebrities to help put pressure on them to do it. I want to show you a brief video now to give you a snapshot into how that works, and then draw out a couple of lessons we've learnt from campaigns in the last few years.
Every year at this time, the world comes to New York City, and this concert is all about giving back to the world.
What is Global Citizen? Global Citizen is actually a digital platform. You go to globalcitizen.org and you start taking action in support of issues that you care about. You can take action on some of the greatest global challenges of our time, and all of these actions earn you points, and you can use these points to actually enter the Global Citizen Festival for free.
I signed a lot of petitions, emailed a lot of world leaders.
To actually speak to my senator who I've never spoken to before,
mean, that was really cool.
This is the only festival that you can get into only by doing service, only by being a better person. So to see this crowd of thousands, tens of thousands of people who all got here by taking action is so inspiring.
We need you to tweet Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi.
We're sending tweets to Norwegian Prime Minister Erna Solberg. And if they agree to increase their support for the Global Partnership for Education, the rest of the world will follow.
Norway has committed $250 million for next year.
I want you to ask your members of Congress to support the Global Food Security Act.
And over 35,000 of you took action to support our legislation. Last December, we overcame congressional gridlock and sent the Water to the World Act to President Obama for his signature.
Education is hope. Education is peace. Education is a basic human right.
I'm committing right now that the UK will get 6.5 million more girls through school over the next 5 years.
These are our girls. They deserve the same chances to get an education as my daughters and your daughters and all of our children.
It is not natural for people to live in extreme poverty, and I feel part of a movement that is not just building, it is huge already.
I look out and I see a sea of global citizens, optimistic, determined. We can change the world.
So as you can see, through the campaigning that we've done over the last 5 or 6 years, we've been able to provide platforms for some pretty big announcements. But behind the scenes of all of that actually is a group of people not dissimilar to you. They're predominantly young people, 60% of our base are millennials, and a small group of staff based out of New York who are asking the questions, what are the levers we can pull to help bring these world leaders to do the right thing? 7 years ago, we started a campaign on polio eradication to try and do just that. It was a topic that's dear to my heart because my mother had polio when she was a kid and she can't run or walk properly as a result. Thanks to the efforts of Rotary International and people around the world, polio cases had been reduced 99% from 1988 through to 2010. But to get that final 1%, the world needed to mobilise more money. So we asked the Australian government whether or not they'd be willing to put in any money. They said no. We said yes. They said no. And we realised that we could turn a no into a yes if we asked ourselves the question, what would they actually like? What would make them feel good about what was happening? So we ran a concert with 4,000 attendees. We mobilised 20,000 people in the Foreign Minister's local constituency. We got huge numbers of media impressions to go alongside a thing called the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. The Queen gets together with all the countries that Britain used to own, and they have a meeting every 2 years, and it doesn't have a point. We got together and gave them a point, and it meant that we could get 5 world leaders on a platform together to commit $118 million. That is about 10% of what you need to help get polio eradication going. And today I'm pleased to say that in 2017, there have been 5 cases of polio so far this year. Now, this isn't just because of us, but if we can hold governments to the fire to do something that they didn't want to, or they didn't not want to do because they hated the idea, they just didn't care. We can help them care. And sometimes you can work with governments who already do care. Last year, we were approached by the Global Fund to fight HIV, AIDS, TB, and malaria. They do really phenomenal work in fighting these 3 diseases, and they've saved millions and millions of lives. And they came to us and said, we're trying to raise this year $13 billion in order to be able to save 8 million lives. That's a huge, huge effort. They got the Canadian government, led by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, to agree to host this replenishment for them. But what they had a problem with was saying, this is the first time the Canadian government have ever done anything like this. So we put together a music event, a series of public campaigns, and a whole lot of international pressure so that the Canadian government just had the courage to do something that they sort of wanted to do anyway. And so the second lesson we've learnt is that whether it's a Prime Minister or whether it's just someone in your local community, if you can find a way to help them do the right thing that they already want to do, but being a politician maybe lack the courage to do, then actually there's a huge amount of campaigning that we can progress that way. The third example I want to give you is one that didn't work quite so well, and it's to do with the French. Thank you for laughing at the French. Now, the French are notorious for their love of some things on these issues and hatred for others. They've always said they're a world leader when it comes to education. But last year, when we were working with UNICEF to try and get hundreds of millions of dollars to get refugee children back into school, because we know if refugees are back in school in 30 days, their education continues pretty much undamaged. The French were nowhere to be seen. We wrote letters to them, we called them, UNICEF pulled out all the guns, and we happened to be working with a musician you might know named Rihanna. We got her to write a letter, except she's a little less patient than us. And so what she did was she followed up her letter very quickly with a tweet and a request. Her letter said this. Her letter basically said, "Where's the money?" 2 weeks later, having not heard a response, we said, "Just wait a little longer." She said, "No, I'll tweet him." She set off a round of panic in the President of France's office, who, as you can see, basically said, "I don't know, but I'll go work it out." A week later, the French committed several $million, which, although not a huge amount, got them out of hiding, out into the public. One of the great campaign tools we've got is shame. It's very difficult to shame someone into doing something because they don't want to, but if you can give them some shame and then a path to look great, then you're onto something. So, I've given you 3 examples that are quite high level, quite highfalutin. I want to give one more example now of someone just like you guys. Myhan, one of our youth activists, come on out onto the stage. Myhan, we've been working with over the last couple of months. She was at a training we ran in March, and she saw something happening back home in her native Afghanistan she didn't like. I'll let her tell you what happened next.
Good afternoon, everyone. So as you see this picture, this is something that bothered me, and it didn't look good to me, because this is the new uniform which was designed and approved by the Minister of Education in Afghanistan for high school kids and also primary and middle school students. Obviously, always there's a uniform for girls. And basically the idea that they claimed that was that this uniform is going to be protecting women, and women are feeling comfortable in this uniform, which I don't find it really what they claim. Because to me, the way to keep women comfortable or like safe is not the idea of putting them in a bag and just closing it. So therefore, I designed a group chat in Facebook, and within that, I added all my friends who are living outside Afghanistan in different countries. We came up with the idea of cyber activism and fighting against it through social media. Therefore, we used the hashtag #BanThisUniform and tweeted as many tweets as we could. Also, we created Facebook pages, and we also signed a petition. And basically, the idea was to make sure this is getting rejected by the government. And mostly we targeted the Afghanistan president, ministers, parliament members, Afghan diplomats outside, and also the diplomats of Western countries in Afghanistan. And fortunately, in less than 24 hours, we were successful, and the president of Afghanistan rejected this new uniform. So there's no uniform anymore.
Well done, Myhan. So, I'm thrilled to say that at Global Citizen, we support hundreds of people like Myhan, and the lesson I want us to pull from that in closing is just this idea that the power that each of us have as citizens is unprecedented. We face some big challenges right now, and all of us are going to need to come together to stand up for the values that we believe in. At Global Citizen, we're going to be fighting strongly against some of the things that this government in America have just started to try and do, because we believe that the sort of planet we want to inhabit signs up to the Paris Accord, continues a strong foreign aid program, is proud of its role in supporting refugees, stands up for human rights. And so my request to all of you guys as I finish is to ask the question, what can I do, not just to say what I want, but to step into the shoes of the people I'm trying to influence and ask, what would make them want to give it to me? Sometimes it's a carrot, sometimes it's a stick, sometimes it's a lot of fun, and sometimes it involves shame. At Global Citizen, we're going to continue to use all of the tools we can find to get leaders to do the right thing, because we think that this world needs it And we think that this world needs all of you guys to do the same with your efforts as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. Okay, Simon, come back, come back, come back. Sir, with the sunglasses on top of your head, I just handed you my phone. It's got all my passwords, so don't lose it. I want you to take a picture of us on stage and then go to my Twitter app and tweet something out. And I want everyone to go tweet something out that they're learning today. Because if you haven't noticed, there's a lot of people using Twitter these days. Have you noticed that?
But just a few.
There's some people who get up in the morning, watch Morning Joe, start getting upset. Maybe President of the United States and starts tweeting at the Supreme Court. I don't know if Ruth Bader Ginsburg's on Twitter that early in the morning. But, sir, if you will take a picture, send out something on my Twitter page, don't get me fired, and everyone send a tweet, hashtag MCON, because you all can be the foot soldiers in spreading this message. Because, Simon, wow. I mean, you said I could just introduce you as this bloke from Australia. So then you start a movement, and then it becomes Global Citizen. Just one of the many things you're involved in is your partners who want to not just address global poverty, but end it. My friend Billy Shore tried to take on ending poverty in the US, and he said, I shouldn't have set a date certain, and your date is 2030. But Global Citizen tackles just about everything from today's front page. You guys are looking at birth control to world peace. So we have lots of questions from our audience, and first and foremost, it is, how do you get people to go from the interested stage to the full-on activist, boots on the ground, doing the heavy lifting? All these people here today obviously are ready to really put in the time. How do you encourage other people to do that?
A couple of things. I think the first is think about what turned you on. Most of the time it wasn't someone saying, do this now. Most of the time it was a great story. It was a conversation you had. It was a person you met who got you excited. So for us, so much of it starts with stories. We publish 60 stories a week, about 15 videos to do exactly that, is to help give people a hook. The second thing is ask what's in it for me, right? And that doesn't mean appeal to their self-interest, but just go, what would make me engage with,
Why not?
with this?
Everyone's got self-interest. Why not appeal to it?
Yeah, and then I think the final thing is make at least the first part of it easy. It's very easy to say to a friend, sure, I'll come around and help you for an hour. And if you're anything like me, you've got a lot of friends who say, can you come and help just for a minute? And you're there for the entire day. If they had have said, please help me move all of my furniture to a new apartment, I would have said no. But if they said, can you just help me? I've just got to move this one thing, you'll do it.
Now, do you do what I do and say, I just got to move this one thing and it's all the contents of my house? Or do you truly just give them one small thing, let them start small and go from there?
I think you've got to let people make their own choices. I think sometimes as campaigners, we make the mistake of trying to force people to do all of the things we want, whereas actually most of us in our own lives don't do that. If you think about how we watch Netflix, yes, sometimes we lie on the sofa and binge watch a whole season. But most of the time we start by going, I've got 20 minutes, I'll just watch one episode. And that choice that we have can make a huge difference in how many people we can activate and how much we can get them coming back for more on their terms, not on our terms.
So I don't want to be the rude date who keeps looking at my phone the whole time I'm sitting here with you, but I've got my iPad flooded with questions from the audience. Two I'm going to combine because they're getting a lot of people weighing in, asking you to respond to this. The first one being, how do you plan to put pressure on U.S. politicians right now? And then the second one, how does the current administration here in the U.S. change your plans? And I have to give you kudos. I served in the Clinton administration at the United Nations. We weren't paying our dues. We were in arrears for our UN dues. And I worked on that issue for 2 years, and it took us longer than that to get our dues paid. So it's never an easy time on foreign aid. It's always something people are hesitant to do. How do you tackle that right now with this administration?
So very practically, foreign aid in the 150 account authorised by the Congress, not by the President. The President's budget request plans to rip $9 billion out of life-saving America.
But if you're Congress, you're scared. You see a president that's elected by people who are saying, what about us? What about our jobs? What about our health care? We can't worry about the whole country, the whole world.
There are 28 key votes in the House and in the Senate on foreign aid-related issues that the community have identified, and those are typically motivated by one of three things. Some of them are going to move with the herd and they're going to say, I don't want to disrupt. They're going to be hard, but actually you can get a lot of the folks early because for many of these representatives, they come from strong faith communities where this idea of service with the poor and of seeking justice is actually a defining characteristic of who they see themselves as. So working in those communities to help them mobilise to speak to their own leaders in their own language in Tennessee, in Arkansas, in Kentucky, is actually a vital part of this. It's not for me, someone who lives in a liberal city, to say how to do it. It's to say...
And you're working with them.
Yeah. There are churches leading fantastic work doing this right now. Secondly, veterans and army groups. If you look at what Secretary of Defence Mattis said before he became Secretary of Defence, back when he was just a general, he said, every time you spend money on development and diplomacy, I have to buy less ammunition. The corollary of that is, if we want to keep America safe, this is an incredibly cheap intervention, an incredibly cheap way of doing it. And you've got thousands of vets and military folks around the country standing up. Now, that might not be the first reason I'd normally give. I'd say because it's the right thing to do. But right now, we've got to ask the question, what's going to drive the critical mass of decision makers? And from all the evidence we've seen, actually, you've got huge levels of support for these issues.
But you're also working with the White House. At least in our conversation backstage, you knew who some key players were that aren't people who are very visible out front, but they're making some crucial decisions behind closed doors. So are you actively talking to the administration, or how are you approaching this new White House?
This new White House has fewer people in it than any previous administration, so it's sometimes hard to talk to them because a lot of the jobs aren't filled yet. But we think that it's really important that if you're going to have a discussion with someone publicly, you've got to try privately. And so every time we target a world leader, the first time they hear about it isn't when we send 1,000 people to tweet at them. That's the last resort after we've had meetings and phone calls, and it's what you do when you say, okay, guys, look, if you're not serious about it, then this is what we'll do. And I'll give you one quick example. We're running a festival in Germany on the eve of the G20, Global Citizen Festival Hamburg. Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, is hosting the G20, and we put our event just before because we needed to put pressure on the G20 countries to deliver on their promises to the world's poor. Chancellor Merkel's office had said, we're supportive of your event, that's nice, but we realised that to have real impact, we needed not her to come along to the event necessarily, but we needed her support and her to say, yes, this is important, these issues are important. They were stonewalling us for a while. We spoke to her major spokesperson, Stefan Seibert. He said, this is all very interesting, but do people really support you? We got 3,000 people to tweet them the next day. We then get a message saying the Chancellor has recorded you a video message talking about why she personally cares about these sorts of issues. It wasn't a stick, it was just about saying, as part of the conversation, let's have a conversation, not just shout at people.
All of these segments go so quickly because they're such good speakers, so I'm going to give you two different questions and see how quickly you can tackle them, because one gets just at that, asking how do you get people to respond to your organization if you don't have global celebrities, but I suspect you didn't when you first started. I will say the Hamburg Festival has Coldplay and Chainsmokers and Ellie Goulding, and you get people to come to you give them free tickets, but they have to commit to taking action. So give advice to people who don't have maybe Chris Martin coming on stage to support their cause. The second question that's a different one, but an equally good one is, how does Global Citizen prioritize issues when there's so many global problems to tackle? How do you pick which ones you're going to prioritize?
First question, doesn't matter if they're a celebrity, everyone is influenced by someone. One of the most influential things I've ever seen when I was at Davos years ago was the people who had the greatest influence on CEOs taking climate change seriously were the teenage children of the CEOs.
That's so true. That is so true.
So don't ask who's the most famous person, ask who would influence them, and then how do I get to them, or who in my network would have influence. Then the second question is, what we really want to ask ourselves is, where can you make a real difference? There are so many issues, and it's awful to have to do this, that you have to prioritise and say, where could my voice make a real difference? And sometimes you've just got to wave through things that are terrible and awful, but if I can't make a difference, then I need to go and focus where I can. And for us, that means focusing on the things that are really easy. There's a famine right now, 20 million people, we can do something about it. There's an education crisis, and there's a very immediate thing right now where all of us can stand up and say, what sort of America do we want when it comes to climate change, when it comes to the famine, when it comes to foreign aid?
Well, you are making a difference, and we appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us today. So thank you again for joining us.
Thanks very much.